Mom, Dad, I got a new job. I can't come to the only house I ever lived in. She said, I live on my own.
Testing 1, 2.
They shut it down on my ass retirement, which I think is I haven't hit
Doesn't
Hey, Dan. Good morning. How are you?
I'm here.
What does that mean? What does that mean? You're not feeling good?
Yeah, it comes signals. I didn't go last night.
No, then Gene wrote actually. I think you had said that to me.
You said you might.
I did go. Yeah. Well, I was at the dinner, and I didn't stay for the service. So far, what I'm saying. What'd you think about poetry?
Everything's okay. Travel to Pennsylvania.
Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Shabbat Shalom and Chag Sameach, second day of Hanukkah. I hope you're enjoying the holiday. We do say Chag Sameach, happy holiday. You need some more? Thank you. But strictly speaking, a Chag is a pilgrimage festival from the Hebrew Scriptures. Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot, already listed in the Bible in a couple of the calendars, where people made pilgrimages to Jerusalem, from which we also get the cognate Arabic word Hajj, which is a pilgrimage. Strictly speaking, the Chag, or plural Chagim, apply only to those three festivals. But you know how language expands and becomes more colloquial. So we say Chag Sameach, and the grammar police are not going to be after us. Okay, so sheets are being passed around, sign-up sheets, for two of our three sign-ups, not for sponsoring bagels, because that sheet is pretty filled, but excuse me, for live streaming and for pickup. So as the sheets come around, if you're of a mind to sign up for one or more of those items, that would be appreciated very much. Thank you to Cindy Dettelbach and Cindy Dettelbach for both bagels and live stream this morning. Cindy, thank you. And to Jackie Weiner for picking up. Thank you so much. Okay, let's continue with our blessing. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. We praise you, Lord our God, sovereign of the universe, who sanctifies us through God's commandments, enjoining upon us the obligation to immerse ourselves in words of Torah. Amen. Okay, so we are now dealing with the twin topic of love and friendship, and we've looked at two elements of this topic so far. We looked at examples of human love, that is people to people, and we also began our conversation about, let's call it covenantal love, the love between God and the people. And as we know about covenant, it has at least two different types, the bilateral covenant and the unilateral covenant. The bilateral covenant is of an if-then logic. If you do for me, I will do for you. And that is part of the covenant between God and the Israelites in the Bible. If you keep my commandments, I will protect you. If you don't, I won't. There's also the promissory, or one unilateral covenant. And that's a covenant of promise. I promise to do X for you, with the unstated, now I'm going to state it, addendum, in spite of the fact or irrespective of the fact that you don't do back for me. So God promises the land to the people forever. And that doesn't seem to be, at least in this iteration of it, a bilateral covenant. That's what God says God is going to do irrespective of results or reciprocity. Although the land then becomes, well, it's an interesting question, isn't it? Because the land features in both covenants. In the bilateral covenant, God said, you will have this land, you will be able to live on this land if you follow my commandments. If you don't, I promise exile. In Leviticus chapter 18, I think it is, there is this really wondrous image of regurgitation. The land cannot tolerate immorality. And if whoever is living on the land engages in immoral actions, the land will throw you up, regurgitate you out of itself. Very, very poignant image. So that tenure on the land is dependent on behavior. But God is also engaged in a promissory covenant about the land. This will be your land forever. And you can see how rich that combination is. Morality counts. If you're going to live on the land, you have to do well. But even if you are exiled because you did not live well, you did not live according to the commandments, nevertheless, even though in abeyance, the land is still yours, which suggested to generations of Jews that even though we are exiled from our land for our sins, there will come a day when we'll come back, because that land is promised to us forever. With the interpretation, forever doesn't mean every single day. It just means you own it, you belong there, you'll get there, even if, say, you're not living on the land for 2,000 years. Don't give up. I will bring you back. And that, you can just see how powerful an idea that is, where the land is both contingent, the possession of the land is both contingent and non-contingent. So, we want to go back now to love and the love between God and the people. And just to review quickly what we talked about last week, we talked about God's love for the Israelites in the Bible, and we noticed that God's love is manifest in works. First of all, we noticed in Deuteronomy chapter 7 that God elected the Israelites as an act of love. We could think of love as an emotion, as an attitude, which of course it also can be. But the Bible's view is that love eventuates in activity. If it doesn't eventuate in actions, then it's abstract. And God's love does eventuate in activities, and we looked at 3 of them. The redemption from Egypt. I can give you the citations in Exodus chapter 15. The giving of the Torah, Exodus 15, verse 13. I redeemed you from Egypt in order to bring you to my holy mountain. So that redemption, liberation from Egypt is fundamental, but it has further implications. I redeemed you in order to do certain things for you. Bring you to the holy mountain, which can be but not inevitably interpreted as Mount Sinai for the giving of Torah. I also promised you the land. I will redeem you so that you can come to a land of milk and honey. So that Christian theologians tend to talk about God's saving acts in history. There's a famous book by Ernest Wright, I think, the Harvard theologian a couple of generations ago. The God who acts. So that God is known through God's actions as expressions of the foundation, namely love. So God, through love, redeemed, brought the people to Mount Sinai, and gave them the land. If we want to look at Jeremiah chapter 31, we see a powerful passage that adds to our subject. Jeremiah 31, verse 1. When somebody finds the page, call it out. 839. Very good.
Maybe
837. Thus said the Lord, the people escaped from the sword. See it?
Try 35.
Okay, what number now?
835.
835. Going once. The people escaped from the sword, found favor in the wilderness. Matzah chen bamidbar, graciousness. And grace is, it's not love per se, but grace is an act as a gift. To give a gratuity in a restaurant is not the bill. I pay the bill as an obligation. I give the tip as an act of graciousness. I'm not duty bound to give a tip, and gratuity comes from the word grace. The people escaped from the sword, found favor in the wilderness. When Israel was marching homeward, the Lord revealed himself to me of old. Eternal love I conceived for you then, the Hebrew, ahavat olam. Ahava, love, olam, eternal. Eternal love I conceived for you then. Therefore I continue my grace to you. The word there is chesed, loving kindness, another connotative word for love. Therefore I will continue my grace to you. I will build you firmly again, O maiden Israel. Again you shall take up your timbrels and go forth to the rhythm of the dancers. Again you shall plant vineyards. So this is the Jeremiah predicting exile. But since God's love is eternal, one can recognize, hope, but more than hope, know that the people will come back again. Now Jeremiah is a complicated prophet. Jeremiah also enjoins the people, when they're in the land of Babylonia, to settle down, to follow the laws, and to hope for redemption. So Jeremiah is used throughout Jewish history as the prophet who recommends or commands accommodation to the laws and the mores of the lands in which we live. Okay? Jeremiah doesn't want assimilation. He wants the people to maintain their essence, their difference, but he also wants the people to be able to live a full life in the land in which they find themselves, on the assumption that in God's good time, God will bring us back to the land of Israel. So you can see, Jeremiah in that instance is a political thinker. How should we live our lives in unpromising circumstances? Reconcile yourself to it. Build houses, get jobs, and live in peace with your neighbors, which is not the end of history, because history will only end, if I can put it this way, when the Israelites return to the land. So Jeremiah 31 is in a way the capstone of this discussion about God's love, which doesn't just begin with election, with chosenness, doesn't just eventuate in acts, but also is eternal. And irrespective of what the people do, God's love for the people is forever. Very, very powerful understanding of love, the love of God for the people in the Bible. So what I want to do now is think about Israel's, the Jewish people's, obligation to respond to God's love. Okay? So we're going to look at some familiar passages. Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4, the V'ahavta itself. Chapter 6, verse 4. Page 284. And I did point out last week a certain element of the structure of the prayer book. And I just want to focus on 3 elements here from the prayer book. And think of it as a triangle. And I'm going to look at each of the 3 angles, okay? So, the prayer right before the Shema has in the evening the beginning, Ahavat Olam, which we just looked at here in the Jeremiah passage. God loves eternally. Now, each of the rabbinic passages has what we call a chatimah, which in Hebrew means signature. At the end of a fairly long paragraph comes the chatimah, the signature line, which summarizes the meaning of the paragraph. And the summary line of this particular prayer, the prayer we say right before the reading of the Shema, Baruch atah Adonai ohev amo Yisrael. Ahava, the noun, ohev, the verb, from the same root, aleph, he, vav, or bet. Baruch atah Adonai, praised are you, Lord, who loves, not who loved, participle, present tense, or we might say continual present tense, who loves the people, his people, Amo, his people, Israel. Okay? So that's a summary of Jeremiah, not that it was intended that way. So the prayer right before the Shema, what I'm going to call the first angle of this triangle, is the prayer before the Shema, which expresses God's love for the people eternally. Then we have the Shema. Hear, is the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love, Shema. What's the next angle? The V'ahavta. You shall love the Lord your God. There's the covenant, isn't it? God loved us in a variety of ways, which we've explored in the Bible and which the prayer book details. Who is this God? The one and only God to whom we pledge loyalty. It may be that the best translation of the Shema is, Hear, O Israel, the Lord is your God, the Lord alone. Not the Lord is one, which seems more philosophical. What does one mean? And it can mean 2 things, that God is a unity and not divided into parts, or that there's only one of those. But that's much more philosophical, abstract, conceptual. A better interpretation, since the prayer book is the book of the people, what book in the Jewish tradition is used more often than any other book by so many people? The prayer book. So the prayer book has to contain, if the rabbis were smart, which they were, is a structure of the covenant. God loves us. We then recite, Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone. That's the God who loves us and whom we are supposed to, V'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha, you shall love the Lord your God, and so on. Okay? So that is the kind of the structure of the 3 elements that I've pointed to, which in a way is the heart of the Jewish, let's call it, creed. What it is we believe. So if we go to now Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4, we find the passage from which the Shema and the V'ahavta are taken, which is already an illustration of something interesting, that the prayer book is a combination of readings from Scripture and from the Mishnah and so on, from prior fundamental texts, as well as contributions by the rabbis. So the prayer before the Shema is not itself in the Bible, but is a rabbinic creation. Okay? So I want to, before reading this, just glance at the first 3 verses of chapter 6. And this is the instruction, v'zot ha-mitzvah. This is the instruction, the commandment, the laws and the rules that the Lord your God has commanded me to impart to you, to be observed in the land that you are about to cross into and occupy, land, so that you, your children, and your children's children may revere the Lord your God and follow as long as you live all God's laws and commandments that I enjoin upon you, to the end that you may long endure. Obey, O Israel, willingly and faithfully, that it may go well with you, and that you may increase greatly in a land flowing with milk and honey, as the Lord God of your fathers spoke to you. Okay? I just want to focus on 2 elements of those first 3 verses. 1, land, and 2, bilateral covenant. Love God so that it may go well with you. So this we might call interested action. I do it because I have an interest in doing it, and that is to be rewarded. Or to put it differently, what is the motivation for following the laws in Deuteronomy 6, 1 through 3? The motivation is self-interest. I'm going to do these things so that things will go well with me. So, obeying the laws becomes, in a sense, contingent upon how much I want from doing so. And also, by focusing on the land, it does not universalize the obligation. Who is responsible for following these laws? Those who live on the land or want to live on the land. So I might say there are 2 limitations in verses 1 through 3. Spatially, Israel, and I might say instrumentally. Following the laws is an instrument for the reward I want to get. Notice now when we look at beginning in verse 4, neither of those conditions applies to what has come to be called the V'ahavta. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. Why should I? It doesn't say. This is what you should do. Take to heart these instructions with which I charge you this day. Impress them upon your children. Recite them when you stay at home and when you are away, when you lie down and when you get up. Bind them as a sign on your hand. Let them serve as a symbol on your forehead. Inscribe them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. And that's the end of the V'ahavta. Let's just read on a little bit. When the Lord your God brings you into the land, now we're back to the contingencies of the situation. Land. As he swore to your fathers, and so on, great and flourishing cities that you did not build, and so on. Verse 12, take heed that you don't forget the Lord who freed you from the land. Revere only the Lord and swear by his name. Verse 15, for the Lord your God is in your midst, is an impassioned God, lest the anger of the Lord your God blaze forth against you and he wipe you off the face of the earth. So, the 2 elements that are front and center in the 3 verses before the V'ahavta and in the verses immediately following the V'ahavta are absent from verses 4 through 9. Okay? So when you think about, let's go back into the workshop of the rabbis when they begin to put together the prayer book. And somebody has the bright idea that you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. It's a very good thing to introduce into the prayer book as a kind of the acme, the summit of our impulses toward God. But then somebody said, I'm imagining, why don't we include all of chapter 6? There's some really great stuff there. To which somebody replied, if we introduce the 3 verses before verse 4 and the verses after verse 9, we are introducing qualifications to the love of God. Let's not qualify it in terms of when you're on the land. What about when you're in the diaspora? Or the if-then covenant. What if I don't care so much about reward or punishment? So the bright idea here was to go to chapter 6 and then to recognize that you had to carve out from that chapter just verses 4 through 9, which tell us something fundamental about the love of God. And I want to suggest to you that there are 2 main topics in these verses 4 through 9. The how and the what. How are we to love God? And what does the love of God entail? And one answer to that question is the pitter-patter of the heart. We might think of love as an attitude, as an emotion. But we'll see here that it goes far beyond that. So let's just take a good look at it. Hear, O Israel, Lord our God, the Lord alone. You shall love the Lord your God. How? With all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your might. Now, obviously, or it should be obvious, that the rabbis are going to take that sentence apart. What does it mean with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might? One interpretation is with all your heart, with all of you, with all your soul. Rabbi Akiva, who, as you may remember, was martyred by the Romans, and as his body was going up in flames, he recited the Shema. And his disciples said to him, even to this point, you're willing to acknowledge the sovereignty of God? To which Rabbi Akiva allegedly replied, all my life I wondered what the phrase, with all your soul, means. And I've now discovered, even if God takes your soul, that's the absolute love of God. So with all your soul, he's understanding soul here, not in the philosophical understanding of a dualism, body and soul, but soul meaning the whole person. Even if God takes your soul. In other words, this is the radical rejection of if-then thinking. One could have thought, Akiva would say, with all your soul means with everything you have, except when it comes to the time that an empire is so strong that it can take your soul, and I don't understand how God could allow his faithful to be burnt this way, and that's the utter limit, up to when God takes your soul. I mean, we all stand in awe of those Jews who went to their death in the death camps, reciting the Shema. That was an iteration, a repetition of Akiva's view that the ultimate good in life, irrespective of what happens to us, good or horrible, is to love God, which I want to translate or interpret as the fundamental worldview of the Jewish people, that we are going to remain committed to transcendence, committed to hope, even if evidence for that is nil at this point. We cannot accede to evil. I think is what Akiva's saying here. With all your heart, with all your soul, even if God takes your soul, and with all your might, the rabbi says, some interpretations are, with all your resources. So, what's the how? The how is up to everything. I am to love God with all of my capacities, all the way, all the time. Why? The why isn't given, but we could infer the why. God loved us. God gave us the land, the Torah, redemption, and the promise of eternal love. Therefore, by way of reciprocity, we are to love God extensively as well. Take to heart these instructions with which I charge you this day. Notice there will be no reward and punishment talk in the V'ahavta. Why should I do them? Because God commanded them. Why should I obey what God commands? Because God has loved us, and love deserves love back. Take to heart these instructions with which I charge you today. Here comes the what? Impress them upon your children. Teach them to your children. The Hebrew word v'shinantam is an intensive form of teach, the doubling of the nun. Shinantam. Not just teach them, hey, dinner is over, before bedtime we're going to study a little Torah. I'm really tired, but that's what we ought to do. And so you teach a little Torah. That's not Shinantam. Shinantam is to teach them with intensity, full meaning, a full recognition of the value of the enterprise. So this is a combination of the how and the what. Teach your children with all the implications of that, but do it as if you mean it. Do mean it with the intensity of your motivation. Recite them when you stay at home and when you are away. Now, what is that? Just when you're at home? Just when you're away? No. He knows the topic from A to Z, right? That doesn't mean knows the topic at one extreme and the other. It means all the time. From A to Z is a continuum. When you're at home and when you are away. In every place during your day, right? When you stay at home and when you are away, here comes another one of these. When you lie down and when you get up. When? In all places, at all times. Right? That's spatial and temporal. But all of each category. Which raises a very interesting question. Is this asking me to spend my life every minute, every place, thinking about nothing but Torah? That may be what it is, but it's a little impractical, isn't it? So that I make a distinction between overt and covert awareness. Right? I am not overtly, consciously thinking Torah every moment of my life. But under the surface, it forms my worldview. It's the way in which I lead my life, even if I'm not consciously thinking about it. It strikes me that's a nice compromise between every place and every time, taken literally, and at no place and no time, taken literally. All the time without having to be consciously aware of it. Bind them as a sign on your hand, and then let them serve as a symbol on your forehead. So this might be interpreted as tefillin, right? Head and hand. Although one of Rashi's grandsons interprets it as thoughts and actions. Bind them as a sign upon your hand, what we do in the world, and let them serve as a symbol on your forehead, how we think about things in the world. So this is also a kind of continuum with my fundamental resources, thought and deed. Inscribe them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. Right? Now it focuses on house. And what is this? The doorpost is the threshold, right? That moment of passage between two domains, home and away. And I'm supposed to place it on the doorpost so that, this is an interpretation, when I go in, I notice it. When I go out, I notice it. I have obligations at home. The tefillin reminds me of that. The mezuzah reminds me of that as I go into my household. And it reminds me of my duties in my society when I leave. Every place, all the time, with intensity, fundamentally through teaching and symbol. So that my whole life is organized around certain values for which there are symbols as reminders. But the home here as fundamental. I learn at home how to be a good father, husband, whatever. And I learn when I go out how to be a good citizen. Ellen?
I had never seen anybody lay tefillin, and so I was at the airport once, and there was a group of Orthodox Jews
Right.
laying tefillin.
Yep.
And I thought, boy, I hope I get on their plane.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you wonder about that a little bit, because one could imagine two motivations, maybe three. One is habit, we just do it. The second might be instrumental, I'm getting on a plane, I'm losing control, I'm 38,000 feet up in the air. How about a little good luck? By the way, I've laid tefillin here, how about helping me? Or it could be in the spirit of the V'ahavta. I'm doing it because of the love of God that I feel. You notice love of God seems to me, as I just said, to be a kind of worldview, a way of understanding the world and its possibilities, the world in which I live. Yeah, Cindy?
The inscription on the gate, is that supposed to be unlike, I understand the house, is the inscription on the gates a way of saying these are separate people?
I don't know. I've never really thought about what the gates mean, but that's a good point here. My home, the doorpost, really is about me as an individual going into a home and going out. But the gates are a public manifestation of who I am. That's very nice. It's kind of like putting the menorah in the window, the Chanukiah, to announce the miracle, right? So that the menorah is not only the Chanukiah for Hanukkah, for the family, but it is an announcement, so to speak, to the public that this miracle happened, and by extension, other things. I like that.
If you're looking for metaphor in this passage,
Yep.
it strikes me that this is a prayer, which is instructed before, of exile and how to live anywhere.
Yeah.
Every moment, we're never, the land becomes a metaphor for home. It is not concrete, and it is not the earth.
Right.
It is a metaphor for where we are in time.
Wherever. Yeah, I like it, I like it. The one problem with seeing it as a metaphor is that we have to be careful not to let the literal disappear. Yeah, I'm not suggesting you're suggesting that, but when we say Achilles is a lion, we might be focusing on some of those heroic, muscular aspects of the hero and forget about other attributes which are not included in the metaphor. I mean, a metaphor is both true and false, right? It's what's under the hood that counts, right? So the car with the whatever it was, it's not a hood, but it's the idea of under the bonnet. That's the metaphor. It's what's under the bonnet that counts. But as rich as the metaphor might be, it may obscure the literal. And so in the Jewish tradition, of course, land as a thing, obviously. But I like that.
That's obviously a problem. It is.
What's a problem?
The land is a problem.
What do you mean by a problem?
As homeland, as promise, is a problem as well as a promise.
And what's the problem part? That we're in exile, for example?
That we're, well, I guess in modern definition, what are indigenous people? And are Jews indigenous? Are we indigenous to Israel?
I see what you mean.
Is it our claim?
Yeah. So you're raising the question of what legitimizes the claim that we are the ones who belong on this land. And that's a universal problem.
Right. I mean, it's not just a Jewish problem.
Yeah, right.
It's not just Israeli.
Right. And what's the answer to that question? I don't know. I mean, who was it? The Normans defeated the Anglo-Saxons at the Battle of Hastings in 1066. Does conquest legitimize possession? Is it who was there first, if ever we could find that out? Is it treaty? And maybe it's a variety of those things. The more elements you have, the more secure. But I don't know that there could ever be a consensus on what legitimizes absolute possession of a piece of territory. And so that's the issue. Or to put it in other terms, is the Jewish people destined to be a universal people, a worldwide people, or a particular people? Are we a nation on the land, or are we that and more, or more? Gary?
Do you think these verses form people's superego, as Freud thought?
I can't hear you. It's a little louder.
Do you think these verses help form the superego, as Freud considered the superego?
The two,
Freud? Superego. Superego.
the superego. Oh, I see what you're saying, yeah.
Do you think these phrases, these verses form the superego for Jews in the way in which Freud considered the superego as an area of moral control?
Yeah. It's an interesting point. Well, it certainly has elements of the superego, to try to neutralize the id so that the ego can be formed. I think Freud sometimes, I'm not sure about what I'm about to say, but thinks of the superego as something of a tyrant, stamping out. He does have this notion of the return of the repressed, that repression, the repression of our libido and so on, is a necessary condition for society. We have to suppress, and it's a superego that forces a suppression, but then the repressed id is going to struggle to come back to life, the return of the repressed. So I don't know that this has the tyrannical implication, but certainly a guide, a source of values. The insistence factor, you shall love, is so. I'm stammering now. What do you think?
Well, I think you're getting to the element that I was thinking about. The id could be equated to sin, and the superego is a way of controlling sin, because it tends towards what we call sin.
Right.
It be immoral.
Yeah, yeah,
So these verses tell you what you're supposed to do,
yeah.
and to me, they form the way in which the superego controls the id.
Yeah, no, I think that's well said. And a piece of evidence, evidence for what you're saying is that soon enough, starting in chapter 12 of Deuteronomy, we're going to have 15 chapters of laws. And so this is laying the foundation for obedience. Yeah, good. Yeah. Yeah. Love is different from fear, isn't it? Of course it is. I mean, love has a kind of purity. Why do I love the people I love? That basically not because of what they do for me, but because I find in them things of surpassing value. They are lovable. Yeah. And of course the Bible goes back and forth between the love of God and the fear of God. And Maimonides makes a big deal out of that distinction. Yeah. This is not fear, this is love. The second paragraph of the Shema, just to say something about it, if we go to chapter 11, verse 13, this is the passage that became, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, I think. This is the passage that became, in the Orthodox prayer book, or the traditional prayer book, the second paragraph of the Shema. A paragraph which Reform Judaism eliminated. If then you obey the commandments, notice the beginning. This is now, if then. This is doing what you ought to do, not out of love, but in a certain sense out of fear, that I've got to be mindful of the consequences of my action, not the inherent value of the action itself. If then you obey the commandments that I enjoin upon you this day, loving the Lord your God and serving him with all your heart and soul, we can see a couple of things that attracted the rabbis to this passage. It reiterates the love theme, but now it's adding to it the fear theme. Fear in the sense of reverence, in the sense of there are consequences to my actions. I will grant the rain for your land in season, the early rain and the later rain, reward and punishment. You shall gather in your new grain and wine and oil. This impulse is not at all apparent, or doesn't exist at all in the first paragraph of the Shema, Deuteronomy 6, verse 4 and on. I will provide grass and so on, verse 16. Take care not to be lured away to serve other gods, for the Lord's anger will flare up against you, and he will shut up the skies, and so on and so on. And so it's in a very different mood, I might even say a very different worldview. The love of God worldview is I'm doing certain things for their own sake because they come from God who loves us. The second paragraph of the Shema, in a way, lowers the standards to consequences, fear. I don't want the anger of God to strike out against me. And one wonders, we could talk about this, I think we have, about why the rabbis in their wisdom added this paragraph to the 3 paragraphs of the Shema. And we can understand why the reformers eliminated it. I think it was a mistake to eliminate it, but we can understand why. This is not an exalted view of religion. This is, in a way, a child's view of religion. The curfew is to be obeyed because you will be punished if you don't. Not because you honor me, your father, your mother, who is trying to do this for your own good. Do it for its own sake, out of the relationship you have with your mother and your father, rather than your allowance will be taken away, which is a much lower kind of motivation. I don't know whether you'll agree with that the metaphor of higher and lower. Did somebody, Michael?
Word love, I think we can when we're trying to transmit our personal relationship and understanding between each other,
Yes.
love and light to the deity. Deity is a totally different area. An example of this, I believe, was put by Rabbi Klein. He was tortured, and he was still reciting Shema. And that means love, not even consciously. I can understand and comprehend my each piece of body, my each bone, still dedicated to love of God. And I think that where we have to be very, very careful when we're saying, love your God like a neighbor, like your wife. No, that does not apply.
In what sense doesn't that apply?
It does not apply because you love your wife today, tomorrow she did something, you got upset, and you don't like her. Okay?
You didn't
The
say.
same thing might apply to the husband. I came drunk, and she doesn't like it, and she kicked me out. But God doesn't make it different. If you love Him, you love Him. And there, I will bring some anecdotes.
By the way,
Expression.
you noticed you changed the language here from love to light.
I did not.
Well-
Because when it's on personal level, you easily drop from love to light.
Yes.
When it comes to deity, you cannot. Or you love or you don't. And to share with you, it just was anecdotal. Came from the part of the world which is Jews lived, which did not live in the Soviet Union in time, and they're suffering. And they're saying, when you ask an individual, do you believe in God? Religious people do not answer. They don't question. Non-religious people don't say anything because they don't have answer. And that's the same thing is here. If you love your God, you love. And nothing will happen for you or to you to change this mind.
Well, gosh, you've said a lot there. I mean, here's what I make of just briefly. So Michael, I'm going to talk to those who are live streaming. Michael's idea here is that there's a difference between our relationship to God and our relationship to anybody else, let's say our spouses. For God, love is absolute, and we love God all the time. In an ongoing relationship, say to our friends or our spouses, they may do something which causes us not to like them. What you didn't say, I mean, I may be misunderstanding, is we don't stop loving them, but relationships are up and down. I mean, we disappoint our spouses, our children, our parents, our friends. And if the relationship is one of love, then of course, in the course of a relationship, not every interaction reminds us or underlines the good feelings we have to one another, but that's the category of like. Would you say that when, let's just take a person, for example, you. When you do something that upsets your wife, you think she loves you less at that moment, or she doesn't like you as she did before you did it? Namely, the love, if it's a true love, a love for that person, doesn't diminish, even though it might feel like it. So, and by the way, couldn't we apply the same analysis to God? I mean, when God disappoints us, or when life assaults us, we may not be saying the V'ahavta with quite the fervor that we do when things are going well, because in a real relationship, there are ups and downs. And there are moments when it's one of the challenge to relationships, isn't it? To not allow the foibles of each other to undermine the fundamentals of the relationship. I don't know. Yeah. When Job questions God, wants to bring God to trial, he doesn't like God at that moment, I might want to say, but he maintains his love of God. I don't know whether, if we looked at the text with that question in mind, what we'd come up with. All right, okay, good. Jim?
Well, the word unconditional, I think, is quite relevant. I think with parents and children, including myself, could do things that really, really disappoint the parents, or the child could do this or that, go completely against what you told them to do. You come home and they hug you.
Yeah.
They're angry at you,
There you go.
but they don't stop loving you no matter what you do.
Yeah. At its best. Yeah.
And to the point of the land is ours, seems to be a constant reinforcement that God can overcome the military reality. We see it in the Exodus, we see it in all his readings. Now, throughout history, whoever controls the military controls the land.
Uh-huh.
And up until this very moment, the Jews are up against the military reality. But somehow our belief tells us God will take care of our enemies.
Uh-huh.
And that's great, but history doesn't show that that's so.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we have not, and are almost commanded here, not to lose faith.
Right.
That despite our minority, God will take care of the military part.
On God's timetable and not ours.
Right. Yeah, the generation to generation, apparently in God's eyes, are treated as one entity. To us, our time is quite limited.
Yeah.
But that's irrelevant.
No, right. Sometimes it's hard to maintain faith. I mean, it is remarkable that the Jews for 2,000 years maintained faith in the return to the land. I mean, that's a definition of a miracle, I think. But so strong are the fundamental texts, repeated as a ritual 3 times a day. That is part of what kept that hope alive. You're saying these things every single day, and sometimes many times a day. Russell?
I think here that Deuteronomy takes a very pragmatic approach to God-approved or moral behavior. It does it, at least one other instance, in that, yes, love God with all your might. But on the other hand, even if you don't, kind of a carrot and stick, do the right thing, behave in a certain way, chesed and tzedakah, from the highest of taking care of a dead body because they're not going to thank you to, even if you don't want to give money, give it anyway, right?
And that's part of the mitzvah.
That's right.
Yeah. Good. So the do it anyway amounts to recognizing that motivation, though we might like it, even if we don't have it, and there are days when we don't have it, do it anyway. Yeah. So the do it anyway is absolute. Maybe that's encompassed in love. Love is an attitude or an orientation. I don't know. I have to think about it more. But that's great. And in a way, what you're saying is a recognition of the fickleness of human nature. Sometimes we love, sometimes we don't. Even when we don't, it's incumbent upon us to do the right thing, which is a guard against abandoning the project. Yeah, Harry?
Yeah, I feel at a disadvantage because I lack a definition of love. How do you define love? I love my children. Why? Because they are my children. I love my wife because she is my wife. I love my mother because she is my mother. I love God because He is God. I don't know. How would you define the word love?
Right. Well, the Greeks have three words for love: agape, eros, and philia. Philia is friendship, the love of friendship. At least in the Christian tradition, if I understand it, agape, divine love, is not love based on the attributes of the beloved. It's not a response to the beloved, but in a way, the act of love gives value to the beloved. That love is an act of generosity, irrespective of who you are. I love you, and by being loved by me, you are more valuable. So one way of thinking about that kind of love, pure love maybe is a way of saying it, is it's not reciprocal love. It's a gift. Love is a gift. It's a one-way gesture through which I import value to the beloved. And it's also an attitude toward that person. Eros is sexual love. Philia is really friendship. As reciprocated, there's such a thing as unrequited love. I can love you without you loving me. I don't think there's an unreciprocated, unrequited friendship. If I regard you and you don't regard me, that's not a friendship. So, and I think these categories are not distinct. I mean, I think friendship can also carry an attitude. So love, look, there are three words for love in the ancient Greek tradition. So that love has different manifestations, which is why it's hard to define it. But it has those components, we might say, to a greater or lesser degree. It can be an attitude. It can be a gift. I love somebody without having that person be lovable or loving me back. But in friendship, there is a kind of reciprocal love. Look, Philadelphia comes from the Greek philia, the city of brotherly love. So there, I mean, however plausible, friendship, brotherhood, sisterhood is seen as a form of love. So I don't know exactly what to say about it. I mean, it is very hard to define it clearly because there are different kinds of intense relationship. I mean, is a sexual relationship love? Well, look, I mean, lovers yearn for physical intimacy. Can be an expression, a completion of a kind of love as a gift, as graciousness. So, right. It's tough. Jackie?
Yeah, response to Harry. I agree with you that it's very difficult to define love. I think love is a feeling. And love happens over time. You just don't go up to somebody and say, I love you.
Yeah.
It is a feeling you have, and that feeling can be very intense. Like with your spouse, the feeling of love may have initially been an excitement, which grew and maybe physical, and then it became a very intense feeling.
Yeah.
And that feeling was love.
Yeah.
Candy, in many ways, I love Candy, she's a good person, but it's a totally different kind of love
Yeah.
than I had for my husband
Sure.
or anybody else.
Yeah.
So I think it's difficult to describe what love is a feeling from within towards another person. And there are some people you may not love, because love might mean something so intense for you, you can't give it to that person. So,
Yeah, what you've done here is you've clarified through examples, and not so much different kinds of relationship. By the way, I mean, though love is an attitude, notice that in our discussion of the love connection between God and the people, it's also a set of actions. It's not just an attitude. Bind them for a sign upon your hand, and so on. Or God's love for the people through acts of redemption, the giving of Torah, and so on. So love here is a feeling and a set of actions, and not just what I'm calling the pitter-patter of the heart. Right. And maybe the difficulty of defining love is the same as, let's say, defining justice or virtue or happiness. I mean, the largest categories in life are hard to nail down with a straightforward definition. Malcolm?
I just want to expand just this in the direction of the object of our love. So I can love the trees.
Love is?
I'm saying I want to expand the notion of my love for something to consider. So most of what we've talked about is love for other people or love for God. I can love the synagogue.
Yeah.
I can love the trees.
Yeah.
So to me, it's within. It's all my experience
Right.
of a relationship to something outside of me.
Right. Well, but you're defining love now as a passion, and you can have passions for a lot of things. I just love The Godfather. It's a little different from loving my children. So what we'd have to, because you have broadened the definition, or at least the referent. I can love anything. I can love my cat. But now we have to make some distinctions, and I have no idea how to do it. But wouldn't you say there are different kinds of love? Maybe that's why the Greeks have 3 words for it.
Absolutely. I guess my only point is it comes from within.
It's a feeling. It's an intense feeling. Love is intense feeling.
Positive.
All right, positive, intense. Well, its opposite is hate. which we could talk about as a kind of the antipode of it.
It's not conditional, and
It's not conditional. Yeah, it's not conditional. I don't know. Yeah. So what I'd like to do, I think we ought to move on. Let's just, in the minutes that we have, turn our attention now to friendship, since I've passed this out. What you have here is just some thoughts that I put together from thinking about it and doing a little bit of research. For those of you who are live streaming, I've just passed out a 3-page description of friendship. Cindy, my assistant Cindy, does have a copy of this, so that if you would like to have a copy of it, because we're going to begin this today and we're going to continue it next week, just call or write to Cindy. She will send you a copy of it. Okay, so love and friendship. I've put these two together. So let's just take a look. What I'd like to do with this is not only to find some things that are inherently interesting, because I'm looking a little bit at two great views of love, Aristotle's and Montaigne's, but I'd also like us to get a sense of the elements of friendship. What is friendship about before we take a look at two great examples of friendship in the Bible, David and Jonathan and Ruth and Naomi. And we'll just want to see to what degree these are friendships and what are their components. That's what I would like to look at here. Okay, so a working definition of friendship. Friendship is understood here, and this is where I got this line from, is a distinctively personal relationship that is grounded in a concern on the part of each friend for the welfare of the other, for the other's sake, and that involves some degree of intimacy. Okay, so I'd like to unpack this a little bit. Friendship is understood here is, one, a personal relationship that is, two, grounded in a concern on the part of each friend. Okay? So it's a personal relationship that is grounded in concern by each friend for the other in three parts. For the welfare of the other, the well-being of the other, for the other's sake, not for my sake. So I'm concerned for the other's well-being for the other person's sake. And that involves, three, some degree of intimacy. Okay? So that is a nice working definition, it seems to me, of the components of friendship. Yeah?
Are we defining sake as benefit?
I guess so. I'm concerned about the welfare of my friend, not so that my friend can do something back for me, but for my friend's own sake, which I guess means benefit. Does that seem problematic to you?
No, that's why, as I read the word sake in the definition, it argues for benefit.
It argues for benefit. Welfare of the other. Right. Maya?
With welfare, we have sake, and we have a degree of intimacy, which I'm challenged by.
Yeah.
I think welfare may not be the same as benefit.
Okay. All right. Well, then let's just say benefit. I'm hoping for something good for my friend. That's what welfare suggests to me, that things go well with the friend.
If I would put, instead of working definition, love,
Would love be the same thing?
I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe. Concern on the part of each friend for the welfare, that's possible, I guess so. Well, let's use that as a working hypothesis here. That the hypothesis is friendship is in some sense different from love, and Maya is challenging whether that's the case. So when we look at these relationships in the Bible, we'll want to know, is the relationship between David and Jonathan one of love? Does it capture all that we've talked about in terms of love? Or is it something at least partially different? It doesn't mean just using the Venn diagram idea. You know what a Venn diagram is? A Venn diagram is you take a box and then you ask about certain things. Let's say you have mortal things. Mortal things are in this circle. Human beings are in this circle. All human beings are mortal. Would then suggest that these overlap, right? They're not two distinct categories. So the question here is friendship and love two distinct categories? Or is there overlap? Or are they the same? That's complete, because this means they intersect, they have some things in common, but also they have some things that are not common. That's what those two circles mean. But if I want to say they're the same thing, all bachelors or unmarried men, then the two circles are the same. Let's just say they are. I have to think about it. Okay? So that's a hypothesis here. Let's go on just a little bit. So I want to talk a little bit here about Aristotle and then about Montaigne. Aristotle distinguished three types of friendship. This is in his Ethics. Namely, friendships of utility, friendships of pleasure, and friendships of the good, or virtue friendships. A main piece of Aristotle's definition of a true friend, so the implication here is there are three kinds of friendship, but it's only the third kind that is a true friendship. In the sense that friendships of utility, I mean, after all, some of our friendships where we serve one another, right? Where we don't have intimate connections, or it's not about the virtues of each. So that those friendships of utility are not for the friend's own sake, but for my own sake. I'm getting something from these friendships. So Aristotle is suggesting there are three kinds of friendship, only the last of which is a pure friendship, which is based upon virtue. In his writing, a main piece of Aristotle's definition of a true friend is the qualities that the friend possesses. Okay? A friendship of utility is what I want from that person, not the qualities that I admire for their own sake. In his writing, he focuses on the virtue of two people in the friendship, as he says, but the complete sort of friendship is that between people who are good and alike in virtue. Now, they find goodness in one another, and it's the discovery of goodness in each other that cements or enhances the relationship. Since they wish for good things for one another, in the same way insofar as they are good, and they are good in themselves. The defining part of Aristotle's view of true friendship is that it can only be between two virtuous people. So you notice what Aristotle is doing here, which I think is a kind of a nice map of how to look at different friendships. There's the highest form, which is between two good people who are friends and care about one another for their goodness, and they wish good things for that friend. Okay? So think of a friendship in which both find value in the other, but also they think of the friendship as a means or an opportunity for increasing the goodness or the virtue of each other. In other words, they're interested in the growth of one another as well as other kinds of things. C, Aristotle considered a friend as another self. Okay? So, 3 types of friendship, the last of which being the true friendship. Let's just look at Montaigne. I don't know whether you've ever read anything of Montaigne, who was really a great, great person. I mean, Montaigne wrote essays, and at the beginning, he asked himself, what's the subject matter of my essays? And the answer he gave was, myself. I am going to observe myself as a real, not idealized human being. And what does it truly mean to be human if understood without presupposition? In other words, if you start by saying, as Aristotle did, that human beings are rational animals, then I'm likely to identify the quality of human beings as how rational are they? Whereas what Montaigne is saying is, I'm not going to prejudge myself. I'm just going to observe myself as a human being. In this sense, Montaigne became one of the founders of humanism, taking seriously not values, not ideals, but really what does it mean to be a human being? So, I think he wrote 107 essays. I'm going to give you just a sample of the titles of a few of them. One essay has the title Liars. The next, Idleness. On being idle. The third, Cannibals. What do cannibals teach us about what it means to be human? Cruelty. The essay on cruelty is an essay on how hard it is to be virtuous. If you really just examine what it means to be human and all of our foibles, you recognize that we all have within us the inclination to cruelty. Gary's point about the superego, maybe where we've absorbed the superego or we've emphasized enough that whenever we feel like being cruel, we can be cruel with our language, right? That we shouldn't be. So Montaigne is a really interesting guy. I just happened to bring this book. Those of you who are interested in Montaigne, a wonderful book with the title How to Live. In one question, a life of Montaigne in one question and 20 attempts at an answer. So here are a couple of the how to be human. Let me just read them quickly. How to live. Don't worry about death. How to live. Pay attention. Read a lot. Forget most of what you read. And be slow-witted. That's all one chapter. How to live. Survive love and loss. Don't just survive loss. Survive love and loss. How to live. Question everything. That's Montaigne's skepticism, where he says at one point, I know nothing. What do I know? Nothing. How to live. Be convivial. Wake from the sleep of habit. Do something no one has done before. So, if you're looking for a delicious book about Montaigne, there it is. So let's just take a quick look at Montaigne, then we have to stop.
When did he write?
Montaigne's dates are 1533 to 1592. Yeah, so he's at the beginning of the humanist movement. I'm sorry? Oh, yeah, Sarah Bakewell, Bakewell. Montaigne believes that true friendship can occur between people as long as they are very similar. So this is not as highfalutin a view of friendship as Aristotle's. This allows two people to get along so well, as he describes. In the friendship I speak of, our souls mingle and blend with each other so completely that they efface the seam that joined them and cannot find it again. This phrase, their souls mingle, makes of friendship something spiritual, something mysterious. When Montaigne talks about friendship, he does so from his own feelings toward a person of flesh and blood. Etienne de la Boétie, he transferred what he felt for his kindred spirit to the essays. He loved his friend to the point where he felt despondently lost when La Boétie died. We can find a good deal of mystery in a friendship like these two men had. That strange and powerful empathy that Montaigne tried to describe is difficult to understand. Montaigne concludes that they are unimaginable facts for those who have not tried them. So notice that Aristotle tries to list criteria on the basis of which we can evaluate the quality of a friendship, whereas Montaigne, and here it is at the bottom of page 2, and in an attempt to describe the nature of his friendship with La Boétie, Montaigne concludes with his famous expression, "If a man should importune me to give a reason why I loved him, I find it could no otherwise be expressed than by making answer, because it was he, because it was I." Criteria don't help us. We just recognize a deep friendship when we feel it. So, with some of these things in mind, next week we're going to take a look now at David and Jonathan. If you want to look ahead, here are the chapters that we're going to look at. 1 Samuel chapter 18, verses 1 through 4. If you don't know how to symbolize chapters and verses, chapter, then a colon, then the verses. 18:1-4. 1 Samuel 19, verses 1 through 3. And 1 Samuel 20, the whole chapter, 1 through 42. Chapter 20 is an episode in which their friendship is expressed. And then 2 Samuel chapter 1, verses 25 and 26. This is David's eulogy, so to speak, for Saul and Jonathan after they're killed. So that's what we'll look at. Then the book of Ruth, you might want to take a look at Ruth. You might want to look at the whole thing. It's only 4 chapters long, like 80 verses. But there is the real test for the biblical understanding of friendship. It exists between David and Jonathan, but much more in a fragmentary way, right? A few verses here, a few verses there. Okay, I have to run. Yes? Second Samuel 20, verses 20. Oh, no. 2 Samuel chapter 1, 25 through 26. I'll see you next week. Shabbat Shalom. Thanks. Oh, good.
But it doesn't mean the reciprocal isn't a whole. Just to tell you what I'm saying. One of the guys
Get to
On that note, have a good week.
Classes maybe. If you read,
They make a society.
yeah, but if you read Wilkerson's right, they couldn't get out of it, they didn't have they were Jews. Well, first of all, Jews can, yes.
Ready? As long as it's state, you want to buy. My father was fortune. That's the softest.
That's okay.
No, he does.
That's what I made a lot. It's not right.
He does. He managed to find a place.
Okay, so home is 464, 6364, and 27, that's it. And so,